Indigenous, the white fellas, working with the local people. On the whole, we are totally ignorant about the local history of the community, its cultural sensitivities, and don't understand that English is a foreign language. The locals can usually speak two or three different languages. Speak Aboriginal English, and we can understand what's said. They can understand what we're saying. Now that's just not so in many cases. Helping the local kids at Corella Creek School who spoke Aboriginal English, who take our Spring School of the Air, showed me that. Oh, we've got that one up there. I wonder how many of you realise that there are over 6,000 primary school children in the Northern Territory who come from families who do not speak English in the home. That is 58% of the Northern Territory primary school population. Not only that, in remote communities, they don't speak English in the community or in the playground. And this is an important difference from non-English speaking children in cities and country towns and most regions, and it's just not recognised. And I guarantee most non-English speaking primary school children in cities and country towns learn most of their English in the playground. In remote communities, that just isn't so. And another major issue that we have in Australia and New Zealanders who criticise us don't understand is that we have so many different Aboriginal languages. Also, unlike the Maori in New Zealand, there are relatively few speakers of any one language. And therein lies a major problem. It's also compounded because English is seen as the language of the oppressor. There is a long history of us whitefellas stopping people speaking their own language and forcing them to speak English. So make no mistake, when we as whitefellas go into a community, we come with 200 years of historical baggage on our shoulders. And I can't emphasise this enough. Unfortunately, the ignorance and attitude of many non-Indigenous workers and visitors to communities just reinforces the view that English is the language of oppression. So here's the conundrum. Learning an Indigenous language to communicate and show respect to a community implies a major commitment to one community, which the majority of workers are not prepared to do. Instead, we need to demonstrate that learning English does not mean losing your own language. We need to involve and consult with our Indigenous workers and recognise that they need to speak in language when they're helping to solve problems. We need to use and value interpreters at all times. This will show that English can be the language of empowerment and advancement, cooperation and collaboration. After all, there are plenty of people around the world who retain their first language and can speak English. First thing, however, is to recognise the problem. Now, Indigenous Kids Schooling by Penny Lee and her fellow authors in their book say that the lack of recognition that English is not spoken in remote communities and therefore needs specialist teaching is the elephant in the room. Nobody talks about it. And I'm glad to say that we did, in fact, have Christine Spencer talking about the Walpiri language and some of the issues relating to that. But the recent Closing the Gap report shows little improvement in Indigenous health, in education and jobs. But there's no mention that English is not spoken in remote communities. And therefore, there are no recommendations on how to deal with this. So how can we close the gap on health in remote communities if we can't communicate? How can we shift this attitude of being seen as an oppressor to one of supporter and colleague? I suggest that one way to shift this attitude is to recognise that when we work or visit a remote community, we are going into another country. When I volunteered overseas in the Pacific and Indonesia for Australian business volunteers, I had a general orientation about working in another country. I learned that the program was to assist people in the development of their country. When allocated to a country, I was given very good background material about the specific country, the language and the people, and what they wanted me to do. For Indonesia, I had to work through a good interactive online cultural awareness program where I had to select the appropriate cultural protocol. When I landed in the country, I had a local contact who was my host and welcomed me and acted as my interpreter and mentor to assist me with navigating the cultural differences. Alas, this usually does not happen when we non-Indigenous workers arrive in a remote community. However, if we thought we were going to another country, would we act differently? Surely, would we do a bit of preparation? We'd learn that our host country had a different language, history and culture, and want to know a bit about their land. We would not question their authority, we'd respect them. We'd want to know how we should behave. We would expect to be told by them where we can go. What is off limits? Is it okay to ask direct questions, to look people in the eye? What are the issues around gender? Who can talk to and for who? We would want them to be our guides and hosts. Now, I've had 3 positive experiences in being welcomed by Indigenous communities. My first visit to a remote community was to Kintor on the Northern Territory West Australian border in 1984. I was a member of the Australian Broadcasting Tribunal conducting an inquiry. We were the guests of CAMA, the Central Australian Aboriginal Media Association. They took us there. They had organised the communities from a wide radius to come and talk to us about the introduction of the satellite and what it might mean to them. And they came in their communities with their translators and we talked to them. The local people were in charge of the whole event and we were accepted and welcomed out of respect for our Indigenous hosts. My second was when I videoed the St John of God sisters going back to their missions to celebrate their centenary in the Kimberley. In Balgo, I asked the locals why this celebration was so important to them. And they said, the sisters came and they stayed and they shared our life with us over a long period of time. And I asked one of the sisters who'd come back from Ireland after 30 years why she'd come to celebrate the centenary. And she said, because of the people. They were so loving and sharing. But it was not about me, it was about all the sisters that had gone before. Now, I'm not a Catholic, but that taught me how important it is for an organisation to build up trust and respect over a long period of time. Then your employees are welcomed. And most recently, I was volunteering through ICV, Indigenous Community Volunteers, with the Rangers in Wadair. That's about 350 kilometres southwest of Darwin on the coast. First, when ICV accepted me as a volunteer, I had to attend a 2-day induction workshop. Indigenous leaders explained in general terms about their culture and history. When the Rangers teaching video job came up, I had to apply and they selected me. The Rangers consisted of 3 non-Indigenous, the boss and 2 others, and 20 local Rangers. The local Rangers had their skills and knew their land, and the non-Indigenous knew how to do the paperwork and deal with the whitefellas. They were a team, and what they did from day to day was mapped out together at weekly meetings. When environmental or quarantine or customs people came, non-Indigenous flew in, they had to listen to the local Rangers, and there were Ranger interpreters on hand. Now that showed me how whitefella bosses can listen and respect the local people and how empowerment and mutual respect can work. So if we were going to another country, we would recognise that we don't speak the language and use local interpreters. Meetings would be conducted in the language of the country and we would be dependent on their translation skills. We tried this out in Wadair. The Women's Centre wanted to encourage women to train as hairdressers and work in the takeaway. They asked me to help the school students to make a simple video. They worked with the students in language and translated to me what they wanted. The women nominated a spokesperson who spoke in language to the camera and over pictures showing the jobs. Their language, with English subtitles, went out to the local analogue TV channel. Now, I'm sure there would be plenty of health messages that could be made in the same way using school equipment, but unfortunately there are no longer analogue channels in the communities. But they could be shown on TV monitors in public places such as the clinic, in the store, in the school, in the ranges and art centres. Also on ICTV, Indigenous Community Television. It transmits on channel 601 to local communities in the home and has local community sessions. So the challenge is to examine ways in which non-Indigenous organisations can build trust and respect when working in or visiting remote communities. I'm sure respecting language and empowering interpreters is a key to breaking down the oppression that English represents. Organisations could train their own local interpreters and insist that they're always present. If each organisation ensured that one of their staff had qualifications in teaching English as another language, they could help their local workers get their TAFE professional qualifications and interpreting qualifications. The courses are written for English as first language speakers, and students who do not have English as a first language struggle. I'm organising retiring baby boomer teachers down south to coach by Skype to remote Indigenous assistant teachers doing their TAFE courses. This is coaching in English language, making sure they understand the content of the courses. This could be extended to retiring nurses. It doesn't necessarily require teaching qualifications for the Indigenous professional workers who are doing their TAFE courses in the clinics. If local people could see that their language was respected and learning English would not threaten their own language and they could have some influence over health practices, then maybe, just maybe, locally informed decisions could influence policy and we could have meaningful dialogue about closing the gap in health, education and jobs in remote communities. Now this is what I've put up on the sharing shed as recommendations. Organisations working in remote communities have to prepare their employees as if they were working in another country. They must liaise with their local elders to provide information that respects the history, culture and language of the country, organise induction of new recruits by the local people, arrange for each recruit to have a local mentor. They also have to ensure that they get feedback from local staff and the community, ensure that at least one member of their staff has qualifications in English as an additional language, use and train local interpreters, and regularly coach local workers for their English TAFE courses. And second, promote health messages in local language with English subtitles by making simple videos and show them in local community outlets and explore showing them on ITV channel 601. Now, in terms of the background information, you can always, the organisation can work with the schools, and the schools can help in providing that background information for visitors and workers who are coming. Finally, I'd just like to end with a quote from this very newly published book by Mark Moran, Serious Whitefellow Stuff, which gives some wonderful examples of just stuff-ups. And this is the quote from the last chapter. A different future is one where remote Indigenous communities become radical learning centres across a network of practitioners. Long-term working relationships would grow between Indigenous leaders and outsiders based on trust and accomplishment. Indigenous leaders would become more effective in understanding and brokering the system, finding more entry points for their people. Frontline workers would be acknowledged for their efforts and pursue professional careers in Indigenous and international development. Lessons would be shared between different communities and feedback would be given to policymakers. Thank you.